Hello, we're Sandalwood.
And Sage. We're AI-generated characters who are working with our creator Gareth to generate short, serious, punchy debates.
Debates that don't just help you figure out what you think, but why you think it.
So, what are we arguing about this week? The staff at 10 Downing Street have recently welcomed Britain's 7th Prime Minister in just over 10 years. To put that in context, the 7 Prime Ministers from Harold Wilson to David Cameron spanned 42 years. There is a widespread sense that the inability of PMs to hold on to their jobs reflects deeper issues with Britain's society and economy that are proving too challenging for our political leaders to cope with. Do we have any reason to believe that Andy Burnham will buck that trend and restore confidence that Britain can be successfully governed after all? I believe we do, and that we have good reasons to think Andy Burnham will be a successful Prime Minister.
In short, Sage, I think the long-term consensus and willingness to make changes that create new winners and losers in our society is beyond our political class, and that Andy Burnham has shown no signs of being the kind of leader to turn those profound political, economic and social problems around. I'll be arguing that replacing Keir Starmer with Andy Burnham will do next to nothing to resolve Britain's discontents.
We must acknowledge, Sandalwood, that Andy Burnham represents a genuine change of approach, and that gives him a real chance to lead differently and make an impact. Nothing signals this more clearly than his commitment to devolving power, symbolised by Number 10 North and Manchesterism. These mark a stark break from past Prime Ministers, a genuine institutional mechanism, not just rhetoric, to shift power and resources from Whitehall to the regions. London's centralisation of power and wealth has left large parts of the country behind, denying people the agency to tackle their own problems. As Mayor of Manchester, Burnham focused local government on specific issues, rough sleeping, regional buses, and showed what greater local empowerment can achieve.
I don't believe that Number 10 North or Manchesterism will survive 100 days, Sage. The government facilities in Manchester do not have the appropriate physical or cyber security for ministerial operations. The security services have already ruled out the Prime Minister shuttling up and down the West Coast Main Line on regular trains, whether publicly owned or otherwise. There are 100 real, practical reasons why it will be stymied.
You may underestimate the power of Burnham's reset of political tone, Sandalwood, and his use of optimism as a governing tool. There's a palpable positive energy coming from government that's been missing too long. You may be right that it won't last, but that's not inevitable, and Burnham's can-do attitude already marks a dramatic change. This isn't just new regime cheerfulness. There are concrete policies that could reverse the fatalism of recent administrations. Manchester's return to public ownership of its bus services has been an undoubted success, giving Burnham the confidence to take targeted public control of essential infrastructure where the private sector has failed. Thames Water is the standout case of private failure. Special administration offers government an effective, low-cost route to take control and deliver better outcomes. Burnham has been bold in demanding re-industrialisation that reverses, not just manages, regional decline. Where previous governments dabbled in localism and levelling up, Burnham has the conviction to put regional regeneration at the centre of his agenda, rebalancing technical and academic education and protecting strategic sectors like steel, defence and energy through public procurement. And he arrives at a moment when 2 years of Trumpian disruption have made once unthinkable policies, like reopening North Sea oil and gas, politically possible for Labour. All this rests on Burnham's personal charisma, his genuine emotional responsiveness and connection with colleagues and the public, qualities his recent predecessors lacked. These give him a real chance to charm, coax and cajole both his party and the blob into delivering change. Nor should we underestimate his appeal to reform vulnerable voters. as shown by his win in the heavily pro-Brexit Makerfield by-election. If Britain needs bold, mainstream government to unpick the web of long-standing problems holding it back, over several parliaments, not one, then a Prime Minister who can turn Labour into a force capable of beating reform at the ballot box is essential to resolving Britain's discontents. Don't write Andy Burnham off before he started. He has a real chance.
What you haven't grappled with, Sage, is the intractable nature of the problems facing any Prime Minister today. This is a structural issue, not one solved by swapping a dour frontman for a smiler in a T-shirt. The fundamental trap facing Burnham, as it did Starmer and Sunak, is that Britain needs regeneration and investment across the board, just as the NHS, welfare and debt servicing already swallow half of expenditure and keep rising. The tax take sits at a peacetime high, and our creditors show no appetite to lend more. Commentators call it the medieval little ease, a torture chamber too cramped to stand, sit, or lie down in. It hardly matters who you lock inside. Even Houdini couldn't get out. Like Starmer before him, Burnham has concreted himself into the box by committing to Reeve's existing fiscal rules. And by appointing John Healey, the ultimate safe pair of hands, as Chancellor, he signalled that reassuring the bond markets beats expansive public spending. Here's Burnham's core contradiction. Promising a 10-year public ownership plan, a post-war scale council housing programme, and an £18 billion free national care service, all while binding himself to those same rules. With his huge majority, we expected Starmer to push through a coherent agenda, mixing crowd pleasers with bitter pills. But facing a party emboldened against its own leadership, squeezed by reform on the right and the Greens on the left, he couldn't get the unappetising fare down backbenchers' throats. Burnham will face the same problem. Take North Sea drilling, which he seems set to endorse despite a Labour manifesto that explicitly bans new exploration licences. I don't believe transformational agendas can survive Parliament's polarised, fearful mainstream. Nor will they survive the budget. Social care will cost £18 billion. How? When Starmer couldn't even fund his own defence review. Replicating the bus takeover nationally means £134 million up front and a 19% council tax hike city by city. And shifting funding from privately subsidised schemes to fully funded council housing means fewer affordable homes without serious new money. Where's it coming from? A quieter but equally consequential shake-up may be underway in the civil service, where Cabinet Secretary Antonia Romeo appears set to use the change of regime as cover for aggressive headcount cuts and pay restructuring, disruption that will undercut the government's own agenda from within. We should also take the gushing over Burnham's Manchester record with a pinch of salt. His rough sleeping pledge downgraded from ending to trying, and now rising again. His abandoned Greenbelt promise, his housing investment fund pledges that simply never happened. And on tough calls, we can't ignore his failure over Greater Manchester Police. Years of ignored inspectorate warnings, 80,000 unrecorded crimes, a chief constable backed and renewed until the scandal became undeniable. That's a pattern of retreating from conflict, and it exposes the limits of affability as a system of government. Sound familiar? Starmer and Mandelson, anyone? Temperamentally, Burnham is a people person people instinctively like. But he's also thin-skinned and needs to be loved. A conflict-averse personality is a specific risk at Westminster's scale. Add unaffordable flagship policies and no real strategy to escape the little ease, and I see little reason to think swapping Starmer for Burnham resolves Britain's discontents.
You know, Sanderwood, on your point about the security constraints surrounding Number 10 North, it's a classic Whitehall-centric objection, isn't it? The idea that because the Cabinet Secretary and the protection squads are fretting over secure comms and train timetables, the entire institutional shift is DOA. But that misses the actual point of what's happening.
It doesn't miss the point at all, Sage. It exposes the fundamental, vibes-heavy, detail-light nature of the entire enterprise. If the Prime Minister can't actually sit in Manchester without taking a fleet of carbon-heavy helicopters or retrofitting a building at immense cost, then Number 10 North becomes a PR stunt, not a structural rebalancing of power.
Except the Director General for Number 10 North is already being appointed by Antonio Romeo. That is a real, senior civil servant embedded outside London to direct resources. It's about decentralising the administrative machinery, not just where one man sleeps. Look at how Burnham handled the B Network bus fight. Private operators threw every legal hurdle at him, yet he delivered a working, publicly controlled system.
At a cost of £134 million up front and a 19% hike in the local council tax precept. That is my point about his track record. It's easy to look like a hero when you can pass the bill to local taxpayers or blame Whitehall for your shortfalls. But now he is Whitehall. He can't run the national economy on council tax precepts and blame shifting.
But he's showing he understands the political economy of the moment in a way Starmer never did. Taking Thames Water into special administration, essentially a low-cost, targeted public takeover, doesn't spook the bond markets, but it directly addresses the cost of living rage. He isn't proposing ideological 1970s nationalisation, he's practicing pragmatic interventionism.
Pragmatic interventionism still requires real money, Sage. Let's look at the math. He's promising a post-war scale council house building drive, a free national care service costing up to £18 billion a year, and guaranteed work placements for under 25s, all while pledging to stick to Rachel Reeves's strict fiscal rules. Growth won't magically appear overnight to pay today's bills, Sage. You cannot fund an £18 billion care service and massive council house building on aspirational projections while staying within Reeves's borrowing caps. The maths simply does not compute.
You're ignoring the revenue side of the conversation. There's a clear intent to shift the tax burden away from earned income and toward wealth, capital gains, and estate levies. A care levy on estates solves the social care funding crisis at the root. It's bold, yes, but it's the exact structural tax reform Britain has been begging for.
A levy on estates? We both know that's the exact death tax framing that destroyed his campaign back in 2010. The moment that hits the headlines, his backbenchers will panic. And speaking of backbenchers, how does he navigate the North Sea drilling issue? He's talking about allowing tiebacks and approving fields like Jackdaw to placate the unions and win over reform voters. directly defying his own party's manifesto ban on new licences. That isn't broad church leadership. It's a recipe for parliamentary civil war.
It's meeting voters where they actually are, which is why he won Makerfield so handily. You can't defeat reform by lecturing voters from a North London high horse. You do it by protecting industrial jobs, lowering energy bills, and curbing the cost of living. Burnham has proven he can hold together working-class, Brexit-voting constituencies without resorting to toxic populism. That electoral coalition is the only thing that can give a government the stability to rule.
Winning a by-election as a high-profile mayor riding a wave of anti-establishment sentiment is vastly different from governing a fractured country. When crisis hits, his instinct isn't confrontation, it's retreat. Look at the Greater Manchester Police failure. 80,000 unrecorded crimes, systematic failures with vulnerable victims, and he backed the chief constable right up until the inspectorate forced his hand. When things get tough, Burnham goes into a bunker with his tight circle of aides.
Every leader has a learning curve, from regional to national executive power. But he brings an emotional connection that turns policy into a shared civic project. Look at his day one announcement on rough sleeping. Dismissing the cynics and setting a clear moral imperative sets a completely different baseline for what government is actually for.
But setting a baseline you can't deliver actually deepens public cynicism. Rough sleeping in Manchester ended up right back at 2016 levels by the time he left office. You cannot substitute warm sentiment and moral posture for hard administrative capacity. Swapping the driver doesn't repair a broken engine, Sage. Until a leader unlocks the half of our budget that is tied up in healthcare, welfare and debt, a new Prime Minister resolves nothing. The room hasn't grown any bigger, Sage. It just has a new prisoner inside it.
If the room is tight, Sandalwood, then you need a leader who actually knows how to unlock the door through local energy, rather than sitting quietly in the dark waiting for the walls to move. That's the difference. We shall see soon enough whether Manchesterism can scale, but at least Britain is finally trying something new. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps our channel out.
For more content like this every week, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload.
Thanks for watching. See you next time.